Start where the show starts. George Wilkins is supposed to meet Juliette at her place. He isn't there. What's there is a note saying he found what he was looking for down in the lower levels, and next to the note, the dispenser. She reads it as a trail. It leads her to the cavern, to the camp George built on the bones of the old digging machine. Then he's dead. Judicial calls it suicide, and Juliette doesn't believe a word of it. So she does something worth sitting with for a second. She breaks into Deputy Trumbull's apartment before the search team gets there, and she plants the dispenser. Then she lets Billings find it. That gets her a relics investigation. The relics investigation gets her inside Judicial's business. And that's how she starts pulling on George. Look at what everyone in that sequence is actually doing with the same object. George uses it to send a message. Juliette uses it to build a forgery. Billings treats it as evidence. Judicial treats it as leverage. For people, for completely different agendas, and not one of them treats it as a memory. Not once. In Season 1, it's a tool from start to finish. And Juliette's use of it might be the coldest, because she takes the last thing a man she loved left behind, and she weaponizes it against a stranger who did nothing wrong. Here's the part that actually matters. And it's easy to miss because the scene around it is doing a lot of other work. Sims confronts Juliette with a file. The database has the dispenser logged as George Wilkins' property. Judicial had already searched George's apartment top to bottom after his death and found nothing. So the object turning up in Trumbull's flat is, in Sims' words, hard to explain. Bernard smooths it over. Trumbull was on the search crew. He pocketed a curio, no harm done, and everyone remembers this scene for Bernard. The maneuvering. The first real hint that he's playing a longer game than Juliette is. Fair enough, it's a great scene for that. But think about what that file actually means. This is a government that burned every book, every photo, every recording of the old world. The population can't even form a coherent picture of the surface. Total information control. And that same government, when it finds an illegal object in someone's hands, doesn't destroy it. It catalogs it. Owner's name, item description, location recovered, filed in a system an officer can pull up on demand years later. That's strange behavior for a regime supposedly trying to erase these things. Unless the object was never the target. The name attached to it was. The relic database isn't a contraband inventory. It's a list of who currently has something that might give them back to themselves. And Judicial keeps that list for the same reason any surveillance system keeps a list. The object isn't dangerous. The person holding it is. That whole read depends on the dispenser having a history worth hiding. For 2 seasons the show wouldn't give us one. Then it gave us one in the last 90 seconds of the Season 2 finale. And it's worth going back to what actually happened there because a lot of recap coverage flattened it into someone got a PEZ dispenser. Washington, D.C. A freshman congressman named Daniel Keene. A journalist named Helen Drew on what he thinks is a date, and she's running as an interview. She's pushing him on a dirty bomb the administration is pinning on her on. He's had enough, he gets up to leave, and on his way out he hands her a duck-headed PEZ dispenser, a nod to her alma mater, University of Oregon, home of the Ducks. Small, a little awkward, the kind of thing you grab at a gift shop when you don't know how else to end a bad night. Silo has already told us the founding happened roughly 350 years before the present timeline. Which means the object in Helen's hand in Washington is the exact same object in Juliette's hand generations later, having survived an apocalypse, the construction of the silo network, and God knows how many owners in between. Season 3 confirmed that isn't a coincidence or a fan theory. It's on screen. Helen is shown carrying and holding onto that same dispenser in the pre-collapse timeline as her and Daniel get pulled into the government's silo project. Him for his drilling expertise, her for her ability to manage a story. So whatever this object turns out to mean, it was personal a very long time before it was illegal. It entered the world as an awkward exit line at the end of a bad date. Season 3 also gives us the why. The flashbacks introduce the doctor behind the technology, and the description he uses is memory suppression, developed and tested on prisoners first, then rolled out on veterans for the Department of Defense to manage what combat had left in their heads. His own phrase for it is a drawbridge between a person and their past, something that can be lowered to let specific memories back through, or locked up permanently. That's the machinery sitting underneath Juliette's condition in the present day. And it's why the dispenser's actual path through the show carries more weight than most viewers gave it credit for. By season 3, the dispenser has landed with Robert Sims, the man who has spent 3 seasons as the enforcement arm of a system built on erasing the past. According to what plays out on screen, Sims had quietly given the dispenser to his own son, Anthony, years earlier, telling him that as long as he kept it close, things would be okay. A father trying to hand his kid something solid to hold on to. Sims later takes it back and gives it to Juliette himself, the same man built to protect the lie, handing her the one object that can undo it. And it works. Holding it opens the floodgates, George giving it to her the first time, the hard drive, the escape to Silo 17, all of it rushing back through a piece of 30-year-old molded plastic. Here's the argument the show has now earned the right to make. A relic isn't dangerous because of what it does. A watch tells time. A hard drive holds data. A candy dispenser dispenses candy, and this one hasn't held any in 3 centuries. None of that is the point. What makes something a relic is that a person was fully themselves the last time they held it, and the object outlived that version of them. Which means the ban was never really about technology. It's about continuity. Anything that can carry a person across the break in their own memory is a threat to the one thing holding the silos together. The idea that nobody remembers a different way of living. It doesn't matter if that object is a hard drive or a dollar store toy. The mechanism is the same either way. And go back to season 1 with that in mind. Juliette took this exact object and turned it into a forgery to chase down the truth about George's death. 2 seasons later, the same object, handed to her by the man who spent his career enforcing the lie, gives her back the truth about herself. The object never changed. What people needed from it did. Now the honest counterargument, because it's a strong one and it deserves airtime. There's a very deflating version of this whole theory, and it goes like this. In season 1, a props department needed something illegal for Juliette to plant. It had to look harmless enough that the ban itself would seem absurd to the audience, small enough to hide in a jacket pocket, and visually distinct enough to remember. A duck-headed candy dispenser checks every box. It does nothing in season 1 that a spoon, a paperback, or an old photograph couldn't have done just as well. Then, according to public interviews with the showrunner, the internet latched onto the prop because it was funny and specific, and by the time the writers were building out a pre-collapse timeline, they had a piece of iconography with real audience affection already attached to it. So they wrote it into the flashback, confirmed the link publicly. That's exactly what you'd expect if the connection got decided after the fact rather than planned from day one. That's a legitimate read, and it probably is what happened behind the scenes. But it doesn't undercut the argument about the database, because that detail, Judicial logging the object instead of destroying it, was on screen back when this was still just a funny prop nobody thought twice about. Nobody wrote that retroactively. Whether the writers knew in season 1 what this object would become is honestly beside the point. What matters is whether the later reveal is consistent with what was already there. And it is. The most dangerous object in Silo 18 was never dangerous. It was a duck bought at a gift shop by a man trying to end an awkward night, and for 3.5 centuries it didn't do anything except survive. One thing worth being straight about. The show still hasn't told us how this object gets from Helen Drew's hands in Washington, D.C. to George Wilkins, generations later inside a silo. That's over 300 years unaccounted for, and every piece of online recap coverage that tries to draw a straight family line between Helen and George is stitching together 2 different relics. George's actual family heirloom is a travel guide passed down from his grandmother, a children's book about Georgia, which is where his ammonite and his tattoo both trace back to. That's a separate object entirely. Collapsing the 2 builds a family tree that isn't actually supported by anything the show has shown us. So the honest answer is, we don't know the route. And that gap might be the most interesting unresolved thread the show is sitting on, because it's clearly the exact question season 3 was built to eventually answer, whether that comes through Anthony Sims, through whoever came after him, or through some other bridge we haven't met yet. Judicial was never afraid of what this object could do. A watch, a hard drive, a candy dispenser. None of it does anything on its own. What Judicial was actually afraid of is who you were the last time you held it. That's the whole relic system in one sentence, and it took 3 seasons and 1 file from a season 1 filing cabinet to get there. If you want to argue the gap, how this thing gets from Helen to George across 3.5 centuries, That's genuinely the open question worth debating, so leave your read in the comments. And if you want the next one of these the moment it's out, that's what the subscribe button is for. No newsletter, nothing to buy, just the next breakdown finding you when it's ready.